Let's call to order the January 6th meeting of the Platting Board. Will the clerk call the roll, please?
Anastasia Taylor.
Here.
Ellen McKay. Michael Krieger.
Here.
Jody Moses.
Here.
Carol Stolpe. Lendell Story.
Here.
Steve Abel. Ken Fuller.
Here.
Daniel Young.
Present. Okay, we have a quorum. The first item of business is B1, approval of action summaries. We have 3 summaries. Can I have a positive motion on the action summaries? Let's see, Ms. Taylor. Seconded by Mr. Young. Any objection to approval of the action summaries? Seeing none, the summaries are approved. No minutes to be approved. That takes us to item C, special order of business. This is where we typically do our disclosures, any currently perceived potential conflicts of interest. Any members having disclosures to make? Mr. Story, you've weighed in. Let's take you, and then Mr. Young, and then Mr. Krieger has one too. So we'll start with Mr. Story.
In case of S-11650-3, I would like to disclose that my firm, R&M Consultants, is under contract with Heritage Land Bank and the Municipality of Anchorage. And Mr. Hell, who works for R&M Consultants, is representing the petitioner tonight. I do have professional and financial involvement in the case. Therefore, I would like to recuse myself from participating.
Okay. The way we typically tee this up is with a motion, and Robert's rules or somebody says it should be a positive motion. So what we would do is, in order to address Mr. Story's potential conflict of interest, we would move to have him participate. And I see, Ms. Taylor, you've moved, been seconded by Ms. Moses. Ms. Taylor, can you address your motion?
I would move that Mr. Story participate in the case, but I will not be supporting my motion.
Okay. Any other discussion on that? Well, I'm going to also vote no on the motion, and because I do think that that's a significant conflict that would preclude a member from reasonably being able to exercise neutral judgment on it. So we'll vote on this, and a no vote would prevent Mr. Story from participating. A yes vote would direct him to participate. And the way I see it, it's a 3, we have 5 people voting. You can't vote on this, Mr. Story. So why don't we vote now? Okay, we've got 4 votes in. Somebody else wants to vote? How about Mr. Fuller? Were you going to vote on that, Mr. Fuller?
I'm sorry, I moved to Mr. Fuller, I moved.
She cut you off at the pass time.
I did. I'm sorry. Can you tell me how you were going to vote, and I'll fix it? Okay, thank you.
How are you going to vote?
Nay.
Okay, so we got 5 nays and 1 abstention. That's Mr. Story. So the motion fails. Mr. Story, you're not going to be able to participate on that Holton Hills matter. And that puts us into what we call a short board situation. So depending on, I would ask the board's, with the board's consent, I would move that matter of new business forward in the agenda so that we can address the petitioner or the petitioner's representative to figure out if they want to proceed or not. So without objection, I'll call forward F, new business number 1. Is there a petitioner or petitioner's representative here? Hello.
Good evening, I'm Dave Hale of R&M Consultants representing Heritage Land Bank.
Good evening, Mr. Hale. By policy that was enacted before my time, and I don't really understand it so well, but anyway, when you get 5 members out of the 9-member board, or even a 10-member board, because it takes 5 people to approve a motion, there's a sort of a grace period here that will allow you, if you want to postpone this without additional cost to the next meeting, which would be within 30 days. So we offer, the board, under short board circumstances, offers this postponement to you. Have you thought this over?
We have, and we'd like to request to postpone it.
Okay. So this matter will be postponed until the next regular meeting.
Mr. Chair, next regular meeting is February 3rd.
Okay, so thank you. It'll be postponed to February 3rd. And there were a number of email comments. I don't know if anybody is here to testify about that tonight. If you are, I'm sorry if you drove in from Girdwood to be heard on this. But will there be notice to the Girdwoodites and other members of the public that this has been postponed and will be reset for February 3rd to staff? Can you respond to that?
Mr. Chair, today's date is January 6th. February 3rd is less than 30 days away. Typically, we don't. If the board is requesting that they be renoticed, that can be done.
Well, I don't know if that takes a motion or not, but I think it makes sense, given that there were several detailed comments by the public addressing the Holton Hills matter. I would ask then that notice be given in some way that's going to come up again on the 3rd of February. Thank you. Okay, see you on the 3rd.
Thank you.
Okay, that takes us to the next disclosure, which is Mr. Young. You had a disclosure.
I have 3 disclosures. In the case of S11669 Coronado Park subdivision, my firm has worked for the petitioner and has worked on this project, and my firm has also worked for a previous owner of this property. I have no financial interest. No members of my family have financial interest in this matter. Would you like me to do the other disclosures?
Are they on different cases?
Yes.
Well, let's take them one case at a time then. Anyone wishing to make a motion with respect to Mr. Young's disclosure, this would be a good time to make that. Ms. Moses, and is there a second? Mr. Story. Ms. Moses, you have the floor on your motion.
I move that Mr. Young participate in the case S-116694-4 Coronado Park subdivision. And
Okay, and there's been a second. And then would you address your motion, Ms. Moses?
I intend to support my motion. From Mr. Young's disclosure, it doesn't sound like there's a conflict that would create a problem in his participation.
Any other discussion or questions for Mr. Young? The chair has a question. Are you currently doing work for the petitioner on this project?
No, I am not.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Young? Are we ready to vote then? Okay, let's do this by a vote if we can and get all 6 of us. Or you don't get to vote, Mr. Young, on this one.
Yeah, I don't see the vote screen up here.
Are you?
Am I doing something wrong?
Sure.
Let's log you out. Let's see. This is, you're supposed to be on the floor. Move for a second. Let's log you out a minute. I'm first name though.
Ken.
Ken, thank you. I'm not seeing any. Is it on the folder?
Didn't speak the first time, then I talked the second time. Now that's it. I don't know.
Can we deal with Mr. Fuller offline, do you suppose, while we're...
For the moment, yes.
Okay, so...
Sure, ma'am. Yeah, it's yay.
What?
It's
Yeah.
yay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. There you are. So we have 5 yeas, that motion passes. Mr. Young, you've been directed by the board to participate on that case. You had some other disclosures?
Yes, in the case of S11650-3 Holton Hills subdivision, I was an employee of R&M 24 years ago, and I also, my firm has worked for Heritage Land Bank in the past. I'm not actively working for either of those companies, and I have no financial interest. I have no family members with financial interest in this case. I believe I can act fairly.
Okay, what I would suggest is you raise that again next month when they come up again. For now, that they, even without voting on you, I suppose we should have heard it first, because that might have just taken it out of the realm of the possible. But since this was postponed, would you raise that again when it comes up on the 3rd?
Yes.
Thank
well,
you. And was there a third one?
Yes.
Okay.
In the case of S11786-1, Stevens subdivision, my firm has worked for the petitioner in the past. My firm is not working for the petitioner now. I have not worked on this case, and I have no financial interest, and no family members have financial interest. I believe I can be fair and impartial on this.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Can I have a positive motion with respect to Mr. Young's disclosure on the Stevens subdivision case? Thank you, Ms. Taylor.
I move Mr. Young be directed to participate in case S11786-1.
Been moved and seconded by Mr. Story. Ms. Taylor, do you want to address your motion?
I plan to support my motion. The Mr. Young has indicated that he has no personal or financial interest in this case.
Any other discussion or questions for Mr. Young? Okay, we're at that junction again where we're ready to vote on the motion to direct Mr. Young to participate. Would you now vote, please?
What is yay? Whose name? Oh, okay.
Thanks, Mr. Fuller. All right, that motion passes. Mr. Young, you're directed to participate on Stevens subdivision. Any other disclosures? The chair just notes for the record that on this matter on the consent agenda, Coronado Park, I made a disclosure back when this matter was in front of the board and got directed to participate. Nothing has changed, so I don't think it's right for a new disclosure. If you wanted to see my disclosure, it was on page 51 of the packet there. Okay, so that takes us to, we're now in business, we're on the consent agenda. There are 3 items on the consent agenda. 2 of them under 4A and 4B have been withdrawn, so there's really only one matter under the consent agenda. And does any member wish to withdraw that matter from the consent agenda? Okay. Can I have a positive motion with respect to the consent agenda? Ms. Taylor? Do you have a motion there? Thank you. And Mr. Fuller, you seconded that. Any discussion or objection to the approval of the consent agenda? Seeing none, the consent agenda is approved. And that takes us to new business. We've got a postponement on F1A. So next case is Stevens Subdivision, Edition Number 1. We've got 6 people here. Is the petitioner or the petitioner's representative here on Stevens Subdivision? Mr. Doofus? Duffus? Yeah, well, I get close on mine too, so. Welcome.
Thank you very much. This shouldn't be too controversial.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm all messed up. We're supposed to do a staff presentation first.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. Can we hear from staff on that? I beg your pardon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a request to subdivide 2 lots and 1 tract of land into 2 tracts of land with the vacation of the western 100 feet of Barbara Street and a temporary turnaround at the end of that street. The recording of this plat, if approved, will effectuate a rezone from B3 to R7 for this property that was approved by the Assembly with Assembly Ordinance 2006-92 on June 6, 2006. None of the reviewing agencies object to this vacation request. The Traffic Department has judged the vacation request to meet the municipal vacation policy. The Department recommends approval of the vacation of the western 100 feet of Barbara Street running along lots 3 and 4 and the temporary turnaround. I have just one change to the condition number 4 on page 6. The wording should change from instead of dedicate a 35-foot water line easement, it should be dedicate 5 feet for a water line easement. AWU changed their thinking and is only seeking an additional 5 feet for the water line easement. Currently it's 25 feet. They want 30 feet, so they're asking for 5 more feet. There are no other changes. The department recommends approval of the plat for 18 months subject to conditions 1 through 11 on pages 6 and 7 with that change to condition number 4. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Any questions for Mr. McLaughlin? Mr. Young.
Mr. McLaughlin, on number 4, on dedicating a 5-foot water line easement, is there already 15 feet that exist, and this is an addition 5 feet, or would it be more appropriate to have a dedication of a 20-foot water line easement that includes the existing 15-foot?
You can word it however you prefer, or I could just say resolve the dedication with AWU. Both parties are in agreement about the dedication. The language that you just proposed is fine.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. McLaughlin? I have a question, Mr. McLaughlin, on this condition number 8. I'm a little bit confused about whether staff wants there to be a discussion about whether there should be a dedication of a public use easement, or whether staff wants there to be a dedication and then to have some discussion with fire plan and right-of-way about where and how much should be used for that turnaround.
Through the chair, the latter. There needs to be a public use easement dedicated for a hammerhead turnaround, and the dimensions of that hammerhead turnaround need to be resolved with fire and right-of-way, the exact dimensions of it. That is to say that the fire and right-of-way need to go out and inspect it and field verify it, but there's agreement with the petitioner and among the agencies that a hammerhead turnaround is appropriate and desirable. it's just a matter of, perfecting the right dimensions of it.
Just to quibble a little bit, 4 and 5 say dedicate and dedicate. Should 8 start out by saying dedicate, do this, and then resolve the dimensions of it with somebody?
You can word it however you want. The language that's proposed in the staff packet is fine. If you'd like to change the wording, that's fine too. And we do have 2 sentence conditions, one explaining, so that's fine. But there's no disagreement between the petitioner and these departments. They're all in agreement.
Okay.
It's to the benefit of the petitioner.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, now, Mr. Duffus, sorry, didn't keep my powder dry. You've got 10 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Ken Duffus. I'm with Arcterra Consulting, and I'm representing petitioners. This is a long story. It actually started way back when the petitioners had to take care of their handicapped child, and in order to do that, they added on to their house, and when they did that, they caused zoning enforcement to come in and tell them they couldn't do it because they were in a B3 zoning and it was non-compliant, and they were grandfathered in. So they went through the P&Z process of getting it rezoned, and upon that, they had to do a replat, and this is the part of that replat that we're doing now. And there's actually nothing being changed on the property. It actually is going to restrict the property more because under the new zoning, there's less that you can do it. And so all of the activity you see in front of you with regards to the vacations and so forth have to deal with just trying to make the homes compliant, but the 2 existing buildings compliant, the systems compliant, and everybody happy with out there now. And that's in essence how we end up being in front of you today. I have no objection to the comments made by staff with the following exceptions, because I believe them to be somewhat in excess of what's necessary. With regard to the water line easement, there's an existing 15-foot easement there now. AWW only really needed 20-foot, which is what they're looking for. They have easements on the other side, and that will give them a total of 50-foot easements. So we, in essence, are giving another 5-foot, is what we talked with AWW, and I think that's what they're trying to achieve. However, if there's a question about it, resolving with AWW would be fine. Number 6, we would like to see deleted. They're asking for a grading and drainage plan. There's actually nothing going on with the property, so there's nothing to plan for. And the drainage is what it is. There hasn't been a problem out there that I'm aware of. No one has acknowledged any problems, although I have no problem discussing the need for drainage easements, because there was a discussion to that effect on one of the corners of the property. And I think that would be important to at least put that in there and resolve a drainage easement with PM&E. Since there's no construction going on, a sediment and erosion control plan seems a little bit questionable, although if we decide to have to build the turnaround there, then that would be included in that part. So I think if we could leave that resolve the need for a sediment and erosion control plan with regards to the turnaround, that would be fine. And then on items A and B, as far as plat notes go, I was a little confused. I talked with them today. They seem to think that those are standard notes that they use, but while it really doesn't mean a whole lot, it seems somewhat odd to put regulatory issues on a plat. But in those cases, I would probably delete those two. But C is fine. Other than that, I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Duffus. You have 3 minutes and 10 seconds for rebuttal. Anyone have any questions for Mr. Duffus before we move forward? Any questions? I had a question, sir. Just on 7, you were questioning the need for a sediment and erosion and sediment control plan. Is that
correct? I mean, typically we submit those sediment and erosion control plans in conjunction with the development or proposed development. And since there's actually nothing going on other than moving lot lines to make buildings compliant with the existing code, there's really not an erosion or sediment control plan there's no construction going on. So it's difficult to come up with a plan for something that's not going to happen.
And then you jumped too quickly for me. You had a concern about 11A and B?
Correct. It says all lots in subdivision shall conform with the elevations and drainage plans shown on the grading and drainage plan. To do a grading and drainage plan, one has to do construction to change something. Nothing's really changing out there, so there's no grading going on, and that usually goes in conjunction with a drainage plan. So if they're looking for where the drainage patterns are now on the property, they're pretty much as they have been for the last so many years. The only thing that's occurred on those properties that I am aware of is the construction of a septic system. So short of that, there's no development. And from what I can tell from the new zoning, there won't be any new construction short of taking the buildings down and maybe building a new building. You can't add additional buildings to those lots.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Duffus? Okay, anybody in the public? I don't see anyone out there. So the matter rests with the board. Any questions for staff at this point before we hear a motion? Seeing no. Mr. Fuller?
Is number 11 essential? I mean, like he says, he's not changing anything. Why are you putting requirements? If he does move to change anything, wouldn't he have to be complied with some, at what changes are then afoot? Not, you're trying to change something before it happens, according to...
Even without development plans, these are still standard conditions. If you look at PM&E's comments in your packet, these conditions were requested by PM&E. This is a very large piece of residential property, 2 lots or 2 tracts of land of over 70,000 square feet each. These conditions are essential. The only thing that could be changed is the wording resolve the need for could be added to benefit the petitioner. That is to say that they could speak with PM&E personally and make their case for, to say, we don't have any problems. If you field verify it, then this condition PM&E can sign for without requiring, those plans to be provided. So you could add the words resolve, and planning would be fine for that. On condition 4, that was the discussion that we had with Mr. Young earlier, relating to these late comments that came in from PM&E just this morning, that only an additional 5 feet of dedication is needed for that sewer easement. Planning Department does not agree with the petitioner in terms of removing any of the conditions. We don't object to adding the words resolve the need for next to conditions 6 and 7, and we're in agreement with the petitioner about condition 4. That's all.
Okay, so...
a follow-up question, Mr. Fuller? Go ahead.
So if the plat is in place and he wants to regrade, doesn't he have to get a permit anyway if he's significantly changing the current contours?
Can you respond to that question, staff?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Fuller, that'd be correct if they're regrading over a certain volume, cubic yards of material. Those 2 plat notes, A and B, they're not regulatory in and of themselves. They're information only. The reason for this having become standard plat notes is that it has occurred very often that people have done things on their lot, changed the grade, which has adversely affected the drainage patterns, and it adversely affects their adjoining neighbor. It is not allowed to drain from one property to another property. So these are not regulatory in and of themselves. They are informational only. And PM&E has because of the number of problems that have occurred with disruption of existing drainage patterns by private property actions, they're now placing these 3 notes on all plats.
Any other questions for staff? Any follow-up questions, Mr. Fuller? No. Okay. Matter rests with the board. Can I have a positive motion on case S11786-1? Ms. Taylor, and second by Mr. Young. Ms. Taylor, can I hear your motion?
In the case S11786-1, Stevens subdivision, I move for approval of the case subject to the department recommendations listed on pages 6 and 7. It's conditions 1 through...
Can we take them, I'm sorry to interrupt you since you were so... Can we take the vacation first and then the approval of the plat second? For the...
Sorry.
That's okay.
I move for approval of the vacation of the western 100 feet of Barber Street, running along lots 3 and 4, and a temporary turnaround.
Okay. Now, having heard that motion, is there a second? Mr. Young, you're still a second for that? Okay. So let's take that one first. Sorry.
Based on the information presented in the packet and by staff tonight, I concur with the department recommendation to approve the vacation.
Any discussion? Okay. Any opposition to that? All right. I don't see any opposition, so the vacation of the western 100 feet of Barber Street and the temporary turnaround is approved. All right. Next item is the plat. Ms. Taylor.
In the case S11786, Stevens subdivision, I move for approval of the plat for 18 months subject to conditions 1 through 11, listed on pages 6 and 7 of the plat, with the following modifications. On condition number 4, I would like to change the language to read, dedicate a 5-foot water line easement. On condition number 7, I would like to insert the language, resolve the need to, at the beginning of the condition. On condition number 8, I would like to add the sentence, dedicate an easement for a fire turnaround, period, and then keep the language, resolve with fire plan review and right-of-way. The details, I would like to change dedication to the word details, the details of a public use easement for a turnaround. And those are the only modifications I recommend.
Okay, is there a second to that? Mr. Young has seconded it. This is Ms. Taylor. Any further comments in addressing your motion?
Based on the information presented by staff and the petitioner tonight, I believe the basic conditions that are the department recommendations will satisfy any concerns remaining about the plat, and I think the modifications we've made will improve that.
Any other discussion? Mr. Young.
I would like to ask if you're willing to modify number 4, instead of dedicating a 5-foot easement, dedicating an additional 5-foot, because there's already a 15-foot or 15-foot that exists today.
That would be a friendly amendment, I think. So I don't. If the mover is okay with it, I don't think we have to vote on an amendment. And the moving party is okay with that. So the motion on the floor changes with respect to 4 to say dedicate an additional 5-foot water line easement. Any other discussion? Mr. Fuller.
I don't know exactly how to state this, but I'd like to amend it to where 11 is resolve as needed.
Is your microphone on? Punch one of those buttons and get a little green light up there.
The light's on.
Okay, good. Thank you. Go ahead.
I want to add to be resolved as needed on 11.
Okay. So you would make a friendly amendment or an amendment to add somewhere in number 11, something that says, resolve as needed the need to place the following notes on the plat?
Right. I think it's overreaching to have that there at all, personally. If we have in place that they can't grade without a permit, then this is just redundant.
Okay, so that goes back to you, Ms. Taylor. You can agree to that, or you can say you don't want to, and then it will come up as a motion to amend the pending motion. I think that's how we would do it.
I don't think I agree with that. No. I believe that staff has presented information, and I think the notes are at worst neutral, at best helpful, and I would like to see those notes on the plat.
Okay, so I'm kind of wading my way through this parliamentary-wise, but I think that at this point then, Mr. Fuller, what would be in order would be a motion by you to amend the motion on the floor, and then we'll vote on whether or not we want to amend the motion on the floor and see how that shakes out, and then we'll go back to the original motion or the motion as amended.
I'll make a motion to amend it.
All right, is there a second for that? Okay, last call. Is there a second on that, Mr. Young? Or Ms. Moses seconded it, okay? So, do you want to add anything? This is, in the procedure-wise, this is where the moving party gets an opportunity to speak in favor. You've already addressed it, but if you want to add anything.
The state of my case
Okay.
is
Okay.
it's
So,
redundant.
anybody else want to comment on that, Mr. Story?
Yes, I believe the more appropriate thing to do would be to add in item 6, prior to final plat approval, resolve the need for a grading and drainage plan. And if they don't find that there's a need for one, then the notes wouldn't apply. So I think changing 6 would take care of 11.
I'll defer.
Pardon me?
I'll defer to Story. That's that wording.
Okay, well, that's what Mr. Story is saying is that he doesn't think changing 11 is the way to go. He thinks changing 6 is the way to go.
And just drop 11.
Well, 11 would stay in. Your motion to change it would drop. But why don't we vote on Mr. Fuller's motion at this point, unless there's further discussion on it. So we're going to vote on Mr. Fuller's motion, which is to amend the motion on the floor. And Mr. Fuller's motion would add somewhere in condition 11 something about resolving the need to add a plat note. So a yes vote would amend the motion, and a no vote will deny the motion to amend. Okay, so the votes are in. Mr. Fuller's motion to amend the pending motion fails. All right. So next thing is there any other discussion or amendments proposed to Ms. Taylor's motion? And Mr. Story, you had something in mind, I think.
Yes, I would think it would be appropriate to change the wording in item 6 to read, prior to final plat approval, resolve the need for a grading and drainage plan.
And while you're at that, okay. I'm sorry. So, Ms. Taylor, you're the original moving party. How do you view that? Is that a friendly amendment, or is that something that we ought to take up on a vote?
I haven't decided if it's friendly or not. I would like to hear from Mr. Story who he thinks is going to look at it that hasn't, that would give a different recommendation than the conditions we've already gotten from PM&E. What would change procedurally? Would he just, somebody at PM&E said, this is what we want, and now you're telling them to go back to the same person, would they say, this is still what we want, or what do you see happening?
Well, based on the staff's comments, they had commented that these are typical notes that they put on all the plats, and maybe they haven't heard the petitioner to the full extent that they need the grading and drainage plan. If they do, then PM&E has the chance to require the drainage. plan or to remove it. I just think it gives the petitioner an opportunity to discuss it more with PM&E.
Okay, I find that friendly.
You okay with that?
Yep.
Okay, so Ms. Taylor's motion is amended as to 6 to say, prior to final plat approval, resolve with PM&E the need for a grading and drainage plan to be submitted as opposed to shall be submitted. Does that work for you, Mr. Story? Is that what you were trying to get to? Okay. All right. As amended, is there any discussion on this approval of the plat motion? Any further discussion? Chair has a discussion. I'm going to vote in favor of it, but I don't think that if we adopt it, that it's going to change whether or not there's a plat note. I think it may mean that PM&E says now you don't need to have a grading and drainage plan, but I think the plat notes would PM&E may be able to say you don't need a grading and drainage plan, but we still want to have this non-regulatory notice thing in the on the plat, and because that's my interpretation of how this goes, I'm okay with the amendment to number 6 to allow the petitioner an opportunity to convince PM&E that he doesn't actually need to submit a grading and drainage plan at this point because there's no new construction going on. That's my take on it. We ready for a vote? So, is there any opposition to Ms. Taylor's motion? Seeing none, the motion passes, and that finishes up this case. So that takes us to F1C, Roseberry Park Estates. Can we hear from staff?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, the request before you is to amend a note that restricts driveway access for lots that were created by Plat 2005-155 for the Roseberry Park Estates. It was recorded in 2005. This property is located in Eagle River, east of Skyline Drive and south of Overlook Drive. Turning to what am I turning to? I should have outlined the lots that were involved in this particular property on the plat note, but on page 11, there are three lots and one tract that are involved in this request. If you can see Pat Node Homestead tract on the map on page 11, lots 1 and 2 as well as 3 are located in block 3, and they are the subject of this request. And the request is to amend note 8 on the plat that requires Pat Node Homestead tract Lot 1 and Lot 2 to gain access to Jessie May Circle only. They're restricted to driveway access to Jessie May Circle only. However, in construction of this subdivision, the grade of Jessie May Circle is significantly higher than lots 1 and 2. And the Pat Node Homestead. So the flag portion of Pat Node Homestead tract, lots 1 and 2, Jessie May Circle, really is not accessible for a driveway access due to the differential in grade between the right-of-way and those 3 lots. On Lot 3, a permitted driveway has been constructed along the west 30 feet of that property, that parcel, Lot 3. What the property owner did, and there is no representative for this case here tonight. But what the property owner did is they recorded an access easement along the west 30 feet of Lot 3 for the use by Lot 1, 2, and 3 to access Overlook Drive. And that's the only way that they have of exiting their lots, apparently. Project management and engineering, and generally all the reviewing agencies had no objection to amending the plat note. The amendment would be to delete the wording from the plat note that states driveway access from Pat Note Homestead Tract and lots 1 and 2, Block 3, is limited to Jesse May Circle. That is the portion of the plat note on page 3 that is the subject of this amendment. It would not affect any of the driveway access requirements for any other lot in that is cited in that plat note. The only, the one concern that we had was the access easement that the applicant went ahead and recorded really is not enforceable by the municipality, because they did not enter into a joint access agreement so that with the municipality so that they can actually enforce it. And fire department regulations do have to be met because that driveway access is now proposed to serve 4 lots. Fire plan review states that the driveway access has to meet the minimum fire code requirements for width, loading, required turnaround, as well as signage. So the applicant really needs to design that fire access to meet the fire code regulations, and it does need to be reviewed and approved by fire plan review, as well as PM&E, traffic, and right-of-way. So even though they've recorded that access easement, it does have to meet current code in terms of fire safety. So therefore, the department, based on the concerns expressed by fire plan review, we do recommend approval of the request to amend Note 8 on Plat 2005-155 that would eliminate the requirement for lots 1 and 2 and Pat Note Homestead Tract, Block 3, Roseberry Parks Estates, limited to Jesse May Circle. But there are some conditions that need to be placed on that amendment. And the first one is, as I mentioned, the design has to be approved by PM&E, fire, right-of-way, and traffic. They have to submit the design and layout of the approved easement to be recorded to the planning department. That design, along with a resolution amending the plat note, then would be recorded so that it's very clear that the amendment is serving these 3 lots and what the design needs to look like, and then that will be enforceable by the municipality. That concludes the presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. O'Brien, for careful walking us through that. Any questions for staff? A couple of questions. That third condition to the plat note, second line, approved access east, is that supposed to be approved access easement?
You're correct. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. And then I just had a question, dumb question. How are they going to get, if they're coming off of Overlook Drive and they go on that west 30 feet on Lot 3, I'm on page 11 here, don't they need somebody else's permission to get over to Lot 1? Or do they?
Mr. Chair, that's correct. And what they're going to have to do is they will have to get the concurrence from the owner of the Pat Node Homestead Tract, because they will need to have a turnaround that will serve all three of those lots. So it would be, they'll have to get, they already have the concurrence of the owner of the Lot 3, because that easement was already recorded, but they will need to have the concurrence of the owners of Pat Node Homestead Tract, because I suspect, but I don't know until the fire plan review actually approves a design. And fire plan review does have the ability to approve alternate designs that do not require quite so much land as a full-blown cul-de-sac bulb or a turnaround. But I have a feeling that the turnaround will have to be on the Pat Node Tract.
So with that feeling, do we need to change anything in what you've prepared, or you're comfortable with that?
I believe in order to get the amendment, Mr. Chair, I believe in order to get the resolution recorded that the applicant is going to have to resolve these conditions and resolve them with the Pat Nodes. I don't know if that's the name of the owners, but for the Pat Node Homestead Tract, they will have to resolve that. They'll have to have a design, and that will have to be agreed to by the, and you're probably, from a legal point of view, which you're much more expert at it than me, obviously, there may need to be some wording to require or to notify the applicant that they have to obtain the permission from all involved parties, the owners of Lot 1, Lot 2, and Pat Node Homestead Tract.
I'm not trying to make more work for you. I just was...
Mr. Chair, I think it makes sense, actually, as I think through it.
Well, wouldn't that come up when they were submitting the design and layout of the approved access easement to the planning department? The planning department wouldn't approve it if they didn't have sufficient consent or buy-in or whatever from the Pat Node Tract folks?
On pages 43, 44, and 45, they did have the consent of Mr. Pat Node, First National Bank, which is apparently one of the mortgagees, as well as Mr. Steiner as the manager, and this was an agreement between if there's going to be a change to the agreement, because it's going to involve more than just the west 30 feet of Lot 3. So there would have to be a change to the agreement. So they would have to submit a revised grant of common driveway and access easement to be recorded with a resolution against all the properties involved, I would think.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, thank you. No petitioner here, so we don't do any public hearing. That doesn't mean we can't act on it. So matter rests with the board. Are we ready to tee this up for a motion? I think we are, if anyone wants to move on it. Ms. Taylor.
In case S11785-1, Roseberry Park Estates, I move for approval of the request to amend Note 8 on Plat 2005-155, eliminating the requirement that lots 1 and 2 in Pat Note Homestead Tract Block 3, Roseberry Park Estates, are limited to driveway access to Jessie May Circle, subject to the following conditions, 1, 2, and 3. And I would like to change the word east to easement in the second line of condition 3.
Is there a second? Second by Ms. Moses. Any discussion, or can you speak to your motion, Ms. Taylor?
I plan to support the motion based on the information presented by staff and in the packet. I think this is a suitable solution to a problem encountered during construction, and I have no problem with the solution.
Any other discussion? I'm going to support the motion, too, without any further amendment. I'm comfortable that if there needs to be any tweaking of the consent agreement that with this Pat Note thing, that they'll get to that when they get around to submitting it for approval to the planning department. Any opposition to the motion? Seeing none, the motion passes. Okay, that takes us down to appearances. Any appearances, persons to be heard, reports, board member comments. Motion to adjourn. Mr. Young has moved to adjourn. We're adjourned. Thank you for coming out on a snowy night, folks. We're adjourned. Greg,